Maria and I had been married for nearly a decade. We met in college, fell in love quickly, and our lives intertwined like vines. We shared dreams, struggles, and countless memories. Our bond seemed unbreakable, or so I thought. I worked as a software engineer, a job that demanded long hours but provided well for us. Maria had always been supportive, even when I had to stay late at the office or travel for work. She was a freelance graphic designer, allowing her the flexibility to work from home and manage the household. That morning, as I joined her for breakfast, everything seemed normal. We chatted about our plans for the day. Maria mentioned she had a meeting with a new client, some wealthy entrepreneur looking to revamp his brand. I didn't think much of it. Her job often brought her into contact with various types of clients. I kissed her goodbye and headed to the office. The day dragged on, filled with the usual coding challenges and meetings. By the time I got home, it was late, and Maria was already in bed reading a book. We exchanged a few words before I joined her, exhaustion pulling me into a deep sleep. One evening, Maria mentioned she was going to meet her client for dinner to discuss some final details of the project. I encouraged her, knowing how important her career was to her. She dressed up, looking stunning as always, and left with a smile. As the weeks turned into months, Maria's absences became more frequent. Her excuses varied: meetings, deadlines, networking events. I wanted to believe her, but a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach told me something was off. One Saturday, I decided to surprise Maria by taking her out for a spontaneous day trip. I cleared my schedule, bought tickets to a show she loved, and headed home early. But when I arrived, the house was empty. I called her, but she didn't pick up. I texted, and after what felt like an eternity, she replied, saying she was out with a friend and had lost track of time. My heart sank. I spent the rest of the day alone, trying to shake off the growing suspicion. That night, Maria came home late, smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. I confronted her, but she laughed it off, calling me paranoid. I tried to believe her. As days passed, I started noticing more discrepancies. Maria's stories didn't add up, and she seemed to be withdrawing more and more. Our conversations became strained, and the warmth between us began to fade. I felt like I was losing her, but I didn't know how to stop it. One day while Maria was out, I decided to do something I never thought I would. I checked her phone. It felt wrong, invasive, but I needed to know the truth. What I found shattered my world. There were messages from a man named Alex, filled with flirtation, plans, and even confessions of love. I confronted Maria that night, my hands trembling as I held her phone out. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and guilt. "Who is Alex?" I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. Maria broke down as she confessed. Alex was her client, the wealthy entrepreneur. Their professional relationship had turned into something more, something she hadn't intended but couldn't resist. She tried to explain, to justify, but all I could feel was a cold, numbing betrayal. I left the house that night, needing space to think, to process. I wandered the streets, my mind a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. How could she do this to us, to me? What did this mean for our future? As dawn broke, I found myself sitting on a park bench, the world around me waking up to a new day. But for me, it felt like the end of everything I knew. Maria's calls and texts were relentless, but I ignored them. The few times I did pick up, her apologies felt insincere, her pleas for forgiveness hollow. She had always been distant, soulless even, and now it all made sense. Our marriage had been a facade, and I was done playing my part. Eventually, I agreed to meet her, not because I wanted to save our marriage, but because I needed answers. We met at a coffee shop, the tension between us palpable. Maria looked as put together as ever, but her eyes betrayed her fear. She reached out for my hand, but I pulled away, disgusted by her touch. "I'm so sorry, James," she began, her voice trembling. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Spare me the excuses, Maria," I snapped. "Why him? Why now?" She took a deep breath, her eyes darting away. "I was feeling lonely, disconnected. He made me feel wanted." I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter sound that echoed in the small cafe. "Wanted? You've never cared about anyone but yourself. This isn't about loneliness. This is about you being a selfish bitch." Her face crumpled, but I felt no sympathy. "I know I've made mistakes, but I want to make things right, she pleaded. Make things right? I repeated, incredulous. You've been dead inside for years. This marriage was over long before Alex came into the picture. Her tears didn't move me. I was beyond that. We need time apart, I said coldly. Maybe forever. I wasn't going to let her drag me down any further. The next few days were a whirlwind of anger and determination. I contacted a lawyer ready to end this sham of a marriage. I started hitting the gym, channeling my rage into something productive. One evening, as I pounded away on the treadmill, I felt a surge of clarity. I didn't need Maria. I didn't need her excuses, her coldness, her lies. I was better off without her, and it was time I started living like it. I began to make plans. I wanted to travel, to see the world beyond the suffocating walls of our home. I wanted to climb mountains, both literal and figurative. I wanted to feel alive again. The divorce proceedings were swift. Maria didn't contest, perhaps realizing she had no ground to stand on. The house, the savings, the life we had built, I didn't care about any of it. She could have it all. I was starting fresh. One day I packed a bag and set off for the mountains. It was something I had always dreamed of, but Maria had never shared my enthusiasm. Now, nothing was holding me back. As I stood at the base of the first peak, I felt a rush of exhilaration. This was my life, my journey, and I was finally free to live it on my terms. Each step I took up that mountain was a step away from the past. The air grew thinner, but my resolve only strengthened. The climb was grueling, but the challenge invigorated me. I reached the summit, breathless and triumphant, and looked out over the vast expanse below. The world was wide open, full of possibilities, and I was ready to embrace it all. I realized then that Maria's betrayal had been a blessing in disguise. It had shattered the illusion of our marriage and forced me to confront the truth. I deserved better. I deserved to be happy, to be passionate, to be free. As I descended the mountain, I felt lighter than I had in years. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, that didn't scare me. It thrilled me. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to conquer any obstacle. One of the first things I did was reconnect with an old friend, Mark. We had drifted apart over the years, largely due to Maria's disdain for him. Mark was the opposite of Maria, spontaneous, adventurous, and full of life. He was thrilled to hear from me and suggested we catch up over a few beers. We met at our old haunt, a cozy pub downtown. The atmosphere was warm and familiar, and I immediately felt at ease. As we reminisced about the old days, Mark's enthusiasm was infectious. He had recently started a small business, a coffee shop that doubled as an art gallery. His passion for his work was evident, and it reignited a spark in me. "Why don't you come by the shop tomorrow?" Mark suggested. "We're hosting an open mic night. It's a great way to meet new people and just have a good time." I agreed, feeling a rare sense of excitement. The next evening, I walked into the coffee shop, greeted by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of laughter. Mark introduced me to his friends, a diverse group of artists, musicians, and dreamers. I felt an instant connection, something I hadn't felt in years. As the night wore on, I found myself sharing stories, laughing, and even participating in a spontaneous jam session. It was liberating. One of the people I met that night was Sophie, a talented painter with a quick wit and an infectious laugh. We hit it off immediately, spending hours talking about everything from art to our favorite books. There was an undeniable chemistry between us, and for the first time since the divorce, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Sophie and I started dating, and our relationship was everything my marriage to Maria hadn't been. It was passionate, supportive, and full of joy. We encouraged each other's dreams and shared a sense of adventure that had been missing from my life for so long. But not everything was smooth sailing. One night, as Sophie and I were walking back from a late-night movie, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, feeling a knot form in my stomach. It was from Maria. "I need to talk to you. It's important." My heart raced as I read the message. I had no desire to speak to her, but something about the urgency in her words made me pause. Sophie noticed my distraction and asked what was wrong. I showed her the message, and she squeezed my hand. "Do you want to call her?" she asked gently. I nodded, though every part of me wanted to ignore it. I stepped away and dialed Maria's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice trembling. "James, I know I have no right to ask for your help, but I'm desperate," she said, her words rushing out. "My mother is very ill and I don't know what to do." Maria's mother, Claire, had always been kind to me. She didn't deserve to suffer because of her daughter's mistakes. Despite my anger towards Maria, I couldn't ignore someone in need. "Okay, Maria," I said, my voice steady. "I'll come by tomorrow." The next day, I went to Maria's apartment. The atmosphere was heavy and Claire looked frail, her usual vibrant spirit diminished by illness. Maria was a mess, her eyes red from crying. I spent the next few days helping Claire, arranging for medical care and ensuring she was comfortable. It was a strange experience being back in Maria's life, but it also brought closure. I could see how much she was struggling, and it reaffirmed my decision to leave. One evening, as I was leaving Claire's apartment, Maria stopped me. "Thank you, James," she said, her voice soft. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for, but I'm grateful for your help." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I walked away, I felt a sense of peace. I had done the right thing, not for Maria, but for myself. I could move forward with no regrets. Back in my new life, things continued to flourish. Sophie and I grew closer, and Mark's coffee shop became a second home. I started writing again, something I had given up during my marriage. The words flowed, fueled by my experiences and the emotions I had kept bottled up for so long. But life, as always, had its ups and downs. One day, Sophie received a job offer in another city, a chance to showcase her art on a larger stage. It was an incredible opportunity, but it meant we would have to part ways, at least for a while. "I'm so proud of you," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "You have to take this chance." "And what about us?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "We'll figure it out," I said, though the uncertainty gnawed at me. "We've come this far. We'll make it work." Saying goodbye to Sophie was one of the hardest things I had ever done, but it also showed me how much I had grown. I was no longer the man who had let life pass him by. As I watched her train pull away, I felt a mix of sadness and hope. Life was unpredictable, full of twists and turns, but I was ready for whatever came next. I had climbed mountains, both literal and metaphorical, and I had come out stronger on the other side. I was in the back room of the coffee shop, helping Mark with inventory, when I got a call from my younger sister, Emma. She sounded frantic, her words tumbling out in a rush. "James, it's Dad! He's had a heart attack! We're at the hospital!" My heart stopped. Our father had always been a pillar of strength, a man who never showed weakness. The thought of him lying helpless in a hospital bed was almost too much to bear. "I'll be right there," I said, dropping everything and rushing out the door. The drive to the hospital felt endless. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I finally arrived, I found Emma in the waiting room, her face pale and drawn. She hugged me tightly, her tears soaking into my shirt. "He's stable for now," she said, her voice trembling. "But it was close, James, too close." We spent hours at the hospital waiting for updates, our nerves frayed. When we were finally allowed to see him, I barely recognized the man lying in the hospital bed. He looked smaller, frailer, a stark contrast to the strong, indomitable figure of my childhood. "Dad," I whispered, taking his hand. He opened his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Hey, son," he said weakly. "Guess I gave you a scare, huh?" I nodded, tears blurring my vision. "Don't do that again, okay?" He chuckled softly, then winced as pain shot through him. "I'll try my best." The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits and sleepless nights. Emma and I took turns staying with him, our lives put on hold. It was during one of these long nights that Dad and I had a conversation that changed everything. We were sitting in the dimly lit hospital room, the steady beep of the heart monitor the only sound. Dad looked over at me, his eyes serious. "James, there's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I've kept from you and Emma for a long time." I frowned, not sure where this was going. "What is it, Dad?" He took a deep breath, his hand trembling slightly. "Your mother, she had another child before you were born, a son. I never told you because she left him with his father when we got married. I didn't think it would ever matter, but now, I think you should know." I stared at him, stunned. Another child? A brother? Dad nodded. His name is Michael. I don't know much about him. Your mother didn't like to talk about it, but I always wondered if you two might meet one day. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. A brother I had never known about, a part of my family history that had been kept from me. I didn't know how to feel, angry, betrayed, curious. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice tight. Because I don't want to leave this world with secrets, Dad said, his eyes full of regret. You deserve to know the truth. I sat back trying to process the information. A brother. It was almost too much to take in, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to find him, to understand this part of my family's past. One evening, as I was sifting through a box of old family photos, I found a letter tucked between the pages of an album. It was addressed to my mother from a man named Robert Michael's father. My heart raced as I read the words, piecing together the fragments of a story that had been hidden for decades. Robert had written about their son, about the pain of their separation, and his hope that one day Michael might reconnect with his mother's side of the family. It was a poignant, heartfelt letter, and it gave me the lead I needed. I tracked down Robert, now an elderly man living in a small town a few hours away. He was hesitant at first, but when I explained who I was and why I was there, his demeanor softened. He told me about Michael, now in his 40s, living in the same town and working as a teacher. Armed with this information, I reached out to Michael. Our first conversation was awkward, filled with long silences and tentative questions. But as we talked, I felt a connection forming, a bond that transcended the years and the secrets. We agreed to meet, and the first time I saw him, it was like looking into a mirror. We had the same eyes, the same smile. It was surreal, and yet it felt right. James, he said, extending his hand, it's good to finally meet you. I shook his hand, feeling a rush of emotions. You too, Michael. You too. Back in my everyday life, things continued to change. Sophie and I stayed in touch, our bond growing stronger despite the distance. I poured my energy into writing and exploring new creative outlets, finding solace and strength in my passions. Life seemed to be settling into a new rhythm, and I was finding my footing in this new chapter. Reconnecting with Michael was a surprising twist, but one that brought a sense of completeness I hadn't expected. Meanwhile, my relationship with Sophie continued to evolve despite the distance. I focused on my writing, pouring my experiences and emotions into my work, finding a cathartic release in the process. However, just as I began to feel a semblance of normalcy, another storm was brewing. One evening, as I was leaving Mark's coffee shop after a long day, my phone buzzed with a series of frantic messages from my neighbor. My heart sank as I read the words, "James, there's smoke coming from your house! The fire department is here!" I raced to my car, my mind spinning with disbelief. When I arrived, the scene was chaotic. Firefighters were battling the flames that engulfed my home. Neighbors stood around watching in shock, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and burning wood. I spotted my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who hurried over to me. "James, thank goodness you're here. I called as soon as I saw the smoke." "Do they know what happened?" I asked, my voice shaking. She hesitated, glancing around before lowering her voice. "I saw Maria earlier. She was standing outside your house looking upset. Then she went inside. Next thing I knew, there was smoke." My blood ran cold. Maria. Could she have done this? I approached the fire chief, desperate for answers. "We're still investigating the cause," he said, his tone professional but sympathetic. "But given the circumstances, we'll need to speak to your ex-wife." As the fire was finally brought under control and the damage assessed, it became clear that my home was almost entirely destroyed. The structure was compromised, and most of my belongings were lost. I felt a crushing sense of loss, not just for the physical items, but for the sense of security and stability I had been rebuilding. That night, I stayed with Mark. He offered me a place to crash and a shoulder to lean on. As we sat in his living room, I tried to process everything that had happened. "Why would she do this, Mark?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What the hell is wrong with her?" Mark shook his head, his expression one of concern and anger. "I don't know, man, but she crossed a line. You need to report this to the police." The next day, I filed a report and explained the situation to the authorities. They promised to investigate, but the wheels of justice turned slowly. In the meantime, I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life once again. Sophie, despite the distance, was a constant source of support. She flew back to be with me, her presence a balm to my wounded soul. Together, we began the daunting task of sifting through the wreckage, salvaging what little we could, and making plans to move forward. One evening, as we were sorting through the charred remains of my home, Sophie found an old photo album, miraculously untouched by the flames. The images bringing back memories of happier times. "Look at this one," she said, pointing to a picture of me and Maria on our wedding day. "You look so happy." I stared at the photo, feeling a mix of emotions. "Yeah, we were, but that was a long time ago." Sophie squeezed my hand. "You've come so far since then, James. This is just another challenge, and we'll get through it together." But just as things seemed to be stabilizing, another unexpected twist shook my world. One afternoon, while I was at the coffee shop, I received a call from Michael. His voice was tense, filled with urgency. "James, we need to talk. It's about Maria." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What now?" "She showed up at my school," he said, his voice tight with worry. "She was looking for you, and she seemed unhinged." Panic set in. "Is she still there?" "No, I managed to get her to leave, but I think she's desperate. You need to be careful." I thanked Michael and hung up, my mind racing. Maria's actions were becoming increasingly erratic, and I feared what she might do next. I contacted the police again, updating them on the situation and expressing my concerns. That evening, I sat down with Sophie and Mark, laying out everything that had happened. "She's becoming a danger to herself and others," I said, my voice heavy with worry. "I don't know what she's capable of anymore." "We'll figure this out," Sophie said firmly. "But you need to stay safe, James." Then, one night, as I was staying at Mark's place, there was a loud banging on the door. My heart pounded as Mark went to answer it. He returned, his face pale. "It's the police, James. They need to talk to you." I felt a chill run down my spine as I walked to the door. The officers explained that Maria had been involved in an accident. She had driven her car into a tree, and while she was injured, she was going to be okay. But in her delirious state, she had confessed to starting the fire. The news was a mix of relief and sorrow. Maria would face the consequences of her actions, but the woman I had once loved was clearly in a downward spiral. It was a sobering reminder of how far things had fallen apart. One afternoon, I received a call from Maria's lawyer. He explained that Maria had been deemed unfit to stand trial and was being committed to a mental institution for treatment. It was a necessary step, but it was still hard to process. "James," he said, his tone gentle but firm, "this is the best place for her. She needs help, and this is where she can get it." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. While it was a tragic end to our story, it was also a chance for Maria to get the help she so desperately needed. Sophie was there for me every step of the way. She helped me navigate the legal proceedings and offered a shoulder to lean on. Her unwavering support was a beacon of light in the darkest of times. With Maria now in a mental institution, I could finally focus on moving forward. I threw myself into my writing, channeling my experiences into my work. The process was therapeutic, allowing me to process the trauma and find closure. Michael and I grew closer, our bond as brothers deepening with each passing day. We talked often, sharing stories of our past and dreams for the future. It was a connection I hadn't realized I needed, but one that brought me immense comfort. One weekend, Michael suggested we visit the mountains again, this time together. It was a symbolic gesture, a way to reclaim a part of my life that had been tainted by the past. As we hiked up the familiar trails, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We reached the summit, standing side by side, looking out over the vast expanse below. "Thanks for being here, Michael," I said, my voice steady. "I couldn't have done this without you." He clapped me on the back, a broad smile on his face. "We're family, James. We stick together." The trip was a turning point for me. It was a reminder that despite the chaos and heartbreak, there was still beauty in the world. There were still mountains to climb, both literally and figuratively. One afternoon, while I was at the coffee shop, I received a call from the mental institution where Maria was being held. "Mr. James, we regret to inform you that Maria has escaped," the voice on the other end said, tense with urgency. We're doing everything we can to locate her, but we thought you should be aware. My heart raced, a mix of fear and disbelief flooding my senses. How did this happen? I demanded, struggling to keep my voice steady. We're still investigating, the voice replied. Please be cautious and report any contact with her immediately. I hung up, my mind spinning. Maria out there somewhere, unpredictable and potentially dangerous. I immediately called Sophie and Michael, explaining the situation. They were both concerned and urged me to stay vigilant. That night, I barely slept. Every noise seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. The following days were a blur of anxiety and constant checking in with the authorities. They were doing everything they could, but Maria remained elusive. One evening, as Sophie and I were sitting in the living room, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. My heart pounded as I opened it. "James, I need to see you, please." It was Maria. I showed the message to Sophie, who immediately urged me to contact the police. I agreed, forwarding the message to the authorities and hoping they could trace it. The next few days were filled with tension. The police set up surveillance around my apartment and monitored my phone for any more messages. Then, one afternoon, as I was leaving the coffee shop, I felt a presence behind me. I turned and saw Maria, looking disheveled and desperate. My heart skipped a beat. "Maria," I said, my voice firm but calm, "you need to come with me. Let's get you some help." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't need help, James. I need you to listen." I kept my distance, wary of her unpredictable state. "I'm listening, but you need to come with me." Before I could react, she bolted, disappearing into the crowd. I immediately called the police, reporting the encounter. They assured me they were closing in, but the encounter left me shaken. The following night, there was a loud knock on the door. 2 police officers stood there, their expressions serious. "We've located Maria," one of them said. "She's been taken back into custody. She's safe now." A wave of relief washed over me. Maria was back where she needed to be. The officers assured us that she would receive the necessary treatment and that security measures would be heightened to prevent any further escapes. As I closed the door, I turned to Sophie, who hugged me tightly. "It's over," she whispered. "You're safe now." With Maria back in the institution, I could finally focus on moving forward. The fear and uncertainty that had loomed over me began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of determination. Life slowly returned to normal. The coffee shop continued to be a source of comfort and community, and my relationship with Sophie grew stronger with each passing day. We made plans for the future, dreaming of the life we wanted to build together. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our apartment, watching the sunset, Sophie turned to me, her eyes filled with love and determination. "James, I know it's been a tough journey, but I want you to know that I'm here for the long haul. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." I took her hand, feeling a surge of gratitude and love. "Thank you, Sophie. You've been my rock through all of this. I can't imagine my life without you." We sat there in comfortable silence, the future stretching out before us like a blank canvas. There were still challenges to face, but I knew that with Sophie by my side, I could handle anything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a sense of hope and renewal. The past was behind me and the future was bright. I had faced my demons and come out stronger on the other side. Maria was getting the help she needed, and while our paths had diverged, I wished her peace and healing. I had found a new sense of purpose, surrounded by friends, family, and the woman I loved. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready for whatever came next. With a heart full of gratitude and a spirit strengthened by adversity, I embraced the future, knowing that I was finally living life on my own terms.